Hi, welcome everybody to Lunch Poems. Thank you for being here, and it's a pleasure to welcome Geffrey Davis. I'm Camille Santana Considine, this year's graduate coordinator, and I want to start by thanking everyone who makes Lunch Poems possible. Dr. and Mrs. Tom Colby, the library, particularly Amber and the student workers, the English department, and the dean's office. Jeffrey G. O'Brien, the faculty director of Lunch Poems, is unfortunately unable to be here today, but he's prepared the introduction for Geffrey Davis, which I will read. One Wild Word Away, the title of Geffrey Davis's most recent collection of poems, requires us to ask a question. One wild word away from what? It doesn't, however, require us to answer singularly. Several possibilities suggest themselves, including the idea that verbal music stands at that distance, both little and vast, from our normal linguistic habits and conventions. The title could also imply that the poet is seeking unorthodox solutions to the problem of representing both joy and suffering, those two states so difficult to represent in words. Poetry's next or latest answer to that problem stands so close and so far, as distant as other people's minds, or as far as a wildly patterned formulation of verse that the archive hasn't yet produced and domesticated. Davis is a poet committed to occupying that answer position again and again, using, for instance, refrain as an instrument of inquiry into both suffering and joy, and their complex interaction, staging via poetic repetition the ceaseless, relentless fact of pain, as well as the ecstatic, or at least durable, capacity to echo back, to keep speaking past any figuration of lament, to start in the sameness of refrain and end in the inspired, wild difference of the predication that follows from it. Davis is also committed to grounding psychic states in surprisingly concrete terms, finding temporary figures for the seemingly unconveyable. He often makes physical metaphors for mental actions, quote, the sharp roads of our reckoning, or, quote, steadying wonder's blade on my tongue to pollard the heart, end quote, to ground thinking and feeling in the substance and collisions of the actual world, so that psychic life can be sung into a space and a series of witnessable actions and events. Such figurative tethering can never fully succeed and never fully fail. One must move to the next wild word or words, but it is a kind of poetic job security, call it a vocation, in which musical witness must keep on seeking the next set of vehicles for its tenor, which is, as Davis puts it, quote, repairs half answer to the wounds of living in a vulnerable body and the family form and wider disasters that befall both. Reading through these intense refrains and poetic solutions to the problems of the unsayable and of the social, one is stunned not into silence, but into collaborative sounding. The lines are so full of sonic effects, it's a wonder that they manage to say and propose so much about the social. But they do, as the poet demonstrates his, quote, learning by singing to soothe his own doubts, end quote. The next line after this reads, quote, I've answered that hymnal despair before, but the magic of his book is the energy and craft with which it will answer it again. Please join me in welcoming Geffrey Davis.
I'm really, really grateful and honored to be here. We're gonna crawl through my life a little bit. Yeah. King County Metro. In Seattle in 1982, my mother beholds this man boarding the bus, the one she's already turning into my father. His style, if you can call it that, disarming disregard, a loud Hawaiian print shirt and knee-high tube socks that reach up the deep tone of his legs, toward the dizzying orange of running shorts. Outside, the gray city blocks lurch past wet windows, as he starts his shy sway down the aisle. Months will pass before he shatters his ankle during a Navy drill, the service discharging him back into the everyday teeth of the world. 2 of 4 kids will arrive before he meets the friend who teaches him the art of roofing and soon after the crack pipe, the attention it takes to manage either without destroying the hands. The air brakes gasp as he approaches my mother's row, each failed rehab and jail sentence still decades off in the distance. So much waits in the fabulous folds of tomorrow. And my mother, who will take 20 years to burn out her love for him, hesitates a moment before making room beside her, the striking brown face poised above her head, smiling. My mother will blame all that happens, both good and bad, on this smile, which glows now, ready to consume half of everything it gives. I start with that poem a lot. It settles me, for one. But I think about that as not only it's about my birth, about my parents' meeting, but also I know I'm a certain kind of writer before and after that poem. And when I first was working on it, I went back to, at a very different intention. The intention was, miss that dude. Like, may he miss the bus. May you see something, like too much is coming. And then I worked on that, in that draft, in that spirit for a long time, very proudly so. And I can't remember what sort of turned on a light, but I realized that I was writing a poem that was asking my mother to tolerate hearing me say no to my own life. And like, are you really gonna try to fit that spell in a poem? And also I was taking like one of the few stories that's safe for her. When she talks about meeting my father, he's still goofy and safe and capable of beauty. And it's like, are you really gonna take that story and weaponize it? And so I is also when I learned to be kind of afraid of poetry too, of writing poetry, that you can smuggle spells that aren't serving you into your poems, and that poems can be a way to catch those spells and break them. And so, yeah, that poem is an important, like I said, it for some reason grounds me, makes me feel more comfortable. Okay. What I mean when I say truck driver. During the last 50 miles back from Hall, and some months past my 15th birthday, my father fishes a stuffed polar bear from a Salvation Army gift bin labeled Boys 6 through 10. I can almost see him approach the decision, cold, a little hungry, not enough money in his pocket for coffee. He worries he might fall asleep behind the wheel as his giant, clumsy love for that small word, son, guides his gaze to the crudely sewn fabric of the miniature bear down at the bottom of the barrel. Seasons have flared and gone out with little change in his fear of stopping for too long in any city where he knows the addict in him waits, patient as a desert bloom. Meanwhile, me, his eldest child, the uneasy guardian of the house. In his absence, I've not yet lost my virginity, but I've had fistfights with grown men and seen my mother dragging her religious belief to the bitter border of divorce. For years, my father's had trouble saying no to crack cocaine and women flowered in cheap summer dresses. Watch his face as he arrives at last and stretches the toy out. My mother fixed on the porch behind me, the word son suddenly heavy in my father's mouth, His gray coat gathered around his shoulders. He's never looked so small. We could crush him. We hug him instead. How y'all doing? Okay. The epistemology of Rosemary. Together in the garden, a cigarette cradled between her fingers, she tells me of breeding cockatiels, clutch after successful clutch, and what she can't forget, the time of one too many, and the smallest chick pushed from the nest, how she thought mistake and put it back again, only to see the same simple denial. And then, for days, trying to make her hands avian, to syringe feed the bird into flight. One thin month lies between us and our miscarriage, and I feel her grow silent under the new vastness of this wreckage. I try to talk about my father breaking blighted pigeon eggs. At 12, I thought patience and pressed him to wait 1 week, then 2, until frustration set and he crushed the shells before me against the coop. I wanted to gather up each shard, to will those gossamer embryos into growth again. What do we rescue now? At home, gleaning herbs in the evening, as swallows swerve in the fallow air. I lean over her shoulder. Her hair smells of the rosemary we take, and of the rosemary we leave to freeze in the garden. I'll jump a little bit. And then he was here. My son, I mean. The term, at least I learned, was rainbow child, a child that comes into the world after a miscarriage. So he's my rainbow boy. I was talking with a group of bright writers yesterday about form and about how stubborn, wrong, I think is maybe the more accurate word, I was about form. I was convinced that form wasn't for me when I was starting out. And now it's like there's no such thing as poems without form. So which is to say, like, it's okay to move from your stubbornness forward. You'll be all right, maybe. But it took me a while. I think like the sonnet, for example, felt like a really impossible form for me because I was immediately writing about my father and immediately felt like I didn't have permission to write sonnets about him because I wasn't sure that I loved him. But then poems, like I think about Those Winter Sundays as like a kind of quiet or failed or broken sonnet. And once I learned that you could let a form break in a way that teaches you how a form can hold a poem that's maybe also dealing with brokenness, suddenly, you couldn't get me to shut up about form. I also remember like a teacher or reading somewhere, I wish I could remember, but someone once either wrote or told me that one of the reasons why iambic pentameter is so popular is because it's 10 syllables is about the number of syllables you can comfortably carry in a single breath. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, oh shit, like, I think I need that. I think I need that comfort with this content. And so I moved all my lines towards 10 syllables and probably haven't recovered from that conversion since. So there's a lot of like, I say this endearingly, like broken sonnets throughout these books. And this one's called Prayer with Miscarriage. Dear boy, it is true. You took 2 tries to get here. For your mother and me to calyx together a body bold enough to carry the grace of you. Amen. So forgive us if we still bow inside the garden of your miscarried becoming. Grant us the ruined grounds of the first prayer, fiercer than our cleaved breathing. How could we rush to rinse the word loss from our de-parented mouths? Remember this. We surrendered a new name for everything to the tender hour at our chest. Nothing blooms in the old field of maybe. No sound flowers above please. But we endure what's not delivered from the impressions planted by our knees. Amen. That group of writers who are here, I'm sorry for talking about you like in the third person, reminded me that, or made me realize live with them, they were asking such like wonderful questions. And I realized that I was talking myself into an answer for a question I hadn't asked myself. And it was roughly like, what's the meaning of poetry in your life? Which you would think doing it as much as I've done it, like I would have thought about that. And I probably thought about it in indirect ways. But the thing that I found myself saying or talking with them about is that I choose to believe that a big part of this experience is seeking or developing or building like the biggest love that you can while you're here. And then I thought about Roske, bless Roske, the ways in which he reminds us that one of the costs of loves that are that big is grief and loss. And that I think poetry has been the main way for me to come back home after losses that I didn't think, that maybe were convincing me that certain loves just weren't mine. And so I'm going to read one of the hardest topics I've had to take on. And so at the age at which I became a survivor of childhood sexual abuse means that like I don't quite have a sense of memory that isn't some way shaped by that wounding. And I thank God for poetry. Because by the time I reached for my son for the first time, I'd done enough work to show up for that love on its way. So this is Survivor. My arms become two battered branches. The first time I reach toward the not yet wrinkled tenderness of my son's backside, bound to the pre-gnaw of a soiled diaper. Elle lies in our living room, postpartum and pitched inside the warm depth of her own recovery, body busy with soothing the glory of its new stitching. How many darknesses can turn a desire? How many good breaths to cast one wound from the sky? I open as if breaking, until a sudden and enthusiastic and sunshiny geyser of urine from my son's penis startles me into the inane proverb of a laughter you never see coming. My hands still shake as I cinch the boy back into the thin cleanliness of another waiting. And yes, eventually I weep, but only after, and only outside, kneeling in the garden, well beyond the indivisible light of his future. Amen. Okay, I need a funnier one. Thank you for coming. And this one, I'm absurdly claiming has a found fortune cookie proverb. And that proverb is, those who say they sleep like a baby haven't got one. Also, I grew up playing Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, which are fighting games, if the names didn't give that away. And in one of them, like the last, like after you win, there's like a, instruction. And usually if you have the right code, you can make the game do more violent things, unfortunately. But this sort of like calls back that game. So this is, pillow combat with the ultimate sleep fighter. Like in a video game, size does nothing to decide advantage. My demure son throws his demure weight around our family bed with resolve. And so I revolve inside discomfort's orbit, the planet of my sleepiness, demoted, dwarfed, unstudied. Just as I reach my parental threshold of self-denial, just as I go to reinstate the matter of physics, energy, and force, he executes his special move. A combo of lovey words struck half-consciously across the dark, launching me into another vain cycle search for deep space shut-eye. Then, his favorite toy sheep tucked between my folded arms. Finish him. Then, the fresh delicacy of his foot plopped upon my forehead. Fatality. In the game, it's a much more like, finish him. Trying to reclaim that, I guess. Okay. And this is one of the title poems from this middle book, and it's The Night Angler. Dear boy, despite my return to running water and migratory moods, I've spent your life trying to break the feathered wheel of habit in my voice, to bring you evidence that I am done revising the seasons of storm, the God cycles of hurt breath. There I go again. Dear boy, I played you the voicemails my father left years ago and understood then how my tongue will also travel, will mutate to find you, will draw whatever blood it takes to carry the word Father to your feet. Dear boy, let the record show we invented one another. Family, a lighted story set against the shadow and dawn of distances. When I am gone, hold and heat the vastness of this creation. Don't stop speaking to me. Dear boy, on the second message, my father is saying, I just had to listen to your voice. Haven't heard you in a while. And the tribe in his throat trembles. How many gardens have I abandoned to this grief? For the son so loved the worry, he gave his only begotten reality and called the father back. Dear boy, in the beginning, father was a fear I wanted to call love. For years, I waded heart deep into that doubt. For a version of my name I could, with some forgiveness, cast before your image. Dear boy, here's my hand. Because your arrival has mended the grave current of time, in the beginning, I was talking to you. So one of the forms I've tried is like the contrapuntal, which is like a 3-in-1 sort of form in a way. You read the left, you read down the right, and then you read across in a third way. And that form was helpful, and there's a few of them in this book. And I think something about making the form embattled felt reflective of some of the embattlement that the book was taking on at the level of subject and theme. So you will hear like echoes and callbacks in this. And this is separated. No ode to rupture, beyond the dark irreverence for facing down how hope fails. I will admit all the sorry facts my beloved and I survived. Bitternesses that did not sever the days we had, of figuring a way with our histories of grief. Then the fetal pulse faltered, which could have, but for death's unknowable bottom, shattering our original longing, what with weeping I can call a miracle, quietly flooding the shared rooms. Goddamn time, pulling us. I don't want bewilderment left in the wake after a torn wander. And I don't want her alone either inside the absurdity that we wove into home, our reckless desire divided. What future shudder? My God, I need it to matter then, of so many evenings swaying to a hurt close living, smiling and turning according to the brief but unbroken tracks of joy the doom of our loaded hearts could sing. I prayed for a new grace in my hands and voice first, though I tended to claim the losses, both rare and usual, how we fevered the early months to fit love in the mouth, still feral behind our teeth. Then her cancer didn't take her. So I tried blessing every ragged thing, reshaping our tomorrow. Each revised gravity of light, I know, into the actual ending, to become an ugly waiting until some last silence, and whatever field follows being wild with faith, to rise together and not feel. Did we dream for one another? How we outlasted the darkness, the temporary music made by the entire night sometimes, fixed according to the brief but unbroken tracks of joy the doom of our loaded hearts could sing. No ode to rupture, I prayed for a new grace, beyond the dark irreverence in my hands and voice, for facing down how hope fails first. Though, I will admit, I tended to claim all the sorry facts, the losses my beloved and I survived, both rare and usual bitternesses that did not sever how we fevered the days we had, the early months of figuring a way to fit love in the mouth with our histories of grief still feral behind our teeth. Then the fetal pulse faltered. Then her cancer, which could have but didn't take her for death's unknowable bottom. So I tried blessing every ragged thing, reshaping our original longing, reshaping our tomorrow, what with weeping I can call a miracle. Each revised gravity of light quietly flooding the shared rooms. I know. Goddamn time pulling us into the actual ending. I don't want to become an ugly bewilderment left in the wake, waiting after a torn wander until some last silence. And I don't want her alone either inside whatever field follows the absurdity that we, being wild with faith, wove into home. Our reckless desire to rise together and not feel divided. What future shudder did we dream for one another? My God, I need it to matter then, how we outlasted the darkness of so many evenings, swaying to the temporary music made by a hurt close living, smiling and turning the entire night sometimes, fixed according to the brief but unbroken tracks of joy the doom of our loaded hearts could sing. Ever after. Actually, I'm gonna take a drink. 45. Okay. So. Inside the charged dark. Dear Mother, your lessons got me to bear the fearful sounds that faith can make while clearing its throat. I remember the hard man who reaped our purpling Timothy grass each spring, unbuttoning his tan jacket to show a gray kitten, gunky-eyed and nestled against fleece lining. I remember reaching with hesitation while saying her new name. As she grew into cat, I have no memory of feeling her claws. Maybe that was when I started begging to keep buried in me what can hurt. I would never see her outdoors again, but she must have answered the barn cats singing to her readiness for life. You gave me the word pregnant and a story for the act on its way. I remember it was night. I remember trusting your insistence to leave her alone to the body work as we prepared a toweled box in the nearby privacy of the closet. You drifted toward sleep, and I forget how many times I rose and returned her to that darkness before submitting to her urge to burrow beneath the low canopy my knees were making of my blankets. In bed with this restless wonder, I heard a sound I knew but not, because it seemed to come from some strange shore I couldn't find, until I could. The mewing blindness of her first kitten's head, transforming the old boundary of her body. I cried out, certain she was becoming my failure to keep her locked inside the charged dark, my betrayal breaking her into something I still don't have the words. Without language or understanding, I'd made a hideous world. I was hideous and crying. Then the warm safety of your hush was suddenly there, softening the cave of uncertainty at my ear, leading me back into my chance to see I would survive, looking a blessing in its full face before believing I deserved the voice of light. All right. I'm going to close with a new poem. When I was a grad student, Terrence Hayes, bless Terrence Hayes, said both like the most helpful thing and probably the meanest thing at a reading. I don't know if he still holds this belief, but he said that one of the reasons why he always reads new work at readings is because if you're not a writer, you're not writing. I was like, damn. And so I'm trying to, I'm trying out that sort of that commitment to the writing that's happening now. And I've been working a lot with form, like experimenting with new forms. But I'm going to read a pantoum because working with a new form feels like you're inventing the rails in the middle of the instinct. And so to take a break, I found myself turning even more to received form. So this is a pantoum, and I really am appreciating the ways in which the pantoum is sort of beholden to an echo chamber of its own making. And we seem to be like in a moment of great reckoning with the echo chambers that we can create. So maybe that's one of the things that keeps drawing me to pantoums. And this is The Leaving. And thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you. The Leaving. I am in Arkansas, trying to reimagine my voice again and again beyond all sound, Trojaned with doubt. You did that so brilliantly. For so long, I almost couldn't again and again get any sound, to unthink my mind as broken, like you showed me so brilliantly for so long. I almost couldn't thank God for Ozark streams. I sometimes wandered to unthink my mind as broken, like you showed me, for hours repeating the same 4 prayers or thanking God for Ozark streams. I wandered sometimes wanting to soften my life by disarming each breath, for hours repeating the same 4 prayers, which back then were still loaded with fear, meant to soften a life by disarming the breath. And thank God for good friends who laughed at first, which back then worked to unload my fears. When I told just how wrong I'd become, how awful, and thank God for the laughter of good friends, the first to relove these hands. But if they knew what you knew. So I told just how wrong I'd become, how awful. There you go, nearly leaping the bright rails I need to keep these hands lovable, if they only knew. Once time has finished its newest grace, you won't be able to find the rails of happiness I have used to escape you again and again, cloaked by the new grace that time is building for my tomorrow. This green, gray shore you'll never know, because I will have escaped you already, again and again, no longer Trojaned with doubt. You did that. But my tomorrow is this green, gray shore you'll never know in Arkansas, where I am reimagining my voice. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. If you want to keep hearing more of Geffrey's work, we have Pegasus over here selling copies of his books. Please get a copy. You'll sign them. And if you'd like to sign up for our Lunch Poems mailing lists, we have a sign-up sheet by the door, or you can just visit our website at lunchpoems.berkeley.edu. And we have one more reading for the spring, Megan Fernandez on May 1st, which has been rescheduled. Thank you so much for coming.